Allowing by law slave owners and their agents to carry off or kidnap runaway slaves was a real eye-opener to the people of New England. Massachusetts actually enacted laws preventing their officers from assisting in the recovery of runaway slaves, basically telling the slave owner, you chose the United States as an assistant in the recovery of your slaves, well then let the United States capture and hold them. Massachusetts will not dirty its hands in such vile business. Now there were two major incidents, one in Boston and one in Worcester, that when linked together ended the enforcement of the Fugitive Slave Act. Let's join our colleagues in the National Park Service at the Boston African American National Historic Site and learn more about the capture of Anthony Burns.
Here we are in Smith Court. Actually, Smith Court looks pretty close now to the way it used to look in the mid-1800s when this place was buzzing. You know, the centerpiece of the court is, of course, the African Meeting House, the oldest standing black church in the United States. And not only that, but I like to say that the African Meeting House stands as a tribute to that free black community that lived here on Beacon Hill, that was organized, that was motivated, that pretty much determined their own destiny once you got here. You know, this is a big lesson in community, and people came here not only to go to church, but they came here to talk about political issues. I mean, the biggest issue of the time was, of course, the Fugitive Slave Law and slavery in the United States, and what was this state, what was Boston, what was the country going to do about this issue?
The Fugitive Slave Law was reinforcing the institution of slavery, making it possible for slave owners to send posses to the north to retrieve runaway, contraband, fugitive slaves, or what have you. And it is here in Beacon Hill where they met the most resistance.
Yeah, what a time that must have been. You can imagine that slave catchers are coming up to Boston all the time, knowing that there are runaway slaves here. I guess black people had been sneaking away to Boston for 40, 50 years now. And it was up to this neighborhood to make sure that the people knew where the slave catchers were, when they were here, and how to escape in case they came. I mean, there's a whole system of alleys that wanders around in the backs of these buildings, and these are all places that people really had to be aware of. And it was an exciting time. It was a very dangerous time. The last major case was the Anthony Burns case, and that was the big time that the whole city of Boston sent this message. Not just the black community, not even just the white, not even just the abolitionist community, but the entire city said that we're not going to tolerate this, and the whole city was affected by this. Anthony Burns, who was accused of having robbed a jewelry store, and they brought him into jail on these trumped-up charges of breaking and entering into a jewelry store. And then, when you know that as soon as he gets to jail, he meets Deputy Marshal Asa Butman, who wanted to capture Anthony Burns and take him back to Virginia.
He was a mark. And they had something to prove with Anthony Burns. They had something to prove because they wanted to show not only the people here in Beacon Hill, but the rest of the United States that they weren't going to mess around with the laws that governed the land, and that we better uphold these laws. So in the face of that, they called in all the militia possible. And Charles, you want
Yeah, I mean, what it was the President Pierce decided that he had learned the hard way from the last 3 or 4 times, that you had had people revolting against slaves being captured. You had had their marshals have been killed at the State House before. They didn't want this to happen again, so he sends 1,000 federal troops. If you can imagine 1,000 people new to Boston marching into Boston, and then hires another 1,000 of this extra militia,
paramilitary units, whomever
these people. Some of these people are thugs. They have prison records. I mean,
anybody
they're just
walking,
pulling people together here,
bodies,
to make sure that Anthony Burns is going to be returned to Virginia, and at which point the city just shuts down. I mean, if you're walking down Cambridge Street, the main thoroughfares where you had all the commerce here, they're hanging black crepes in front of their windows, in front of all the glass, and I mean, this was a time when people were really, really upset with the federal government. And actually, they do take Anthony Burns. They march him down to the wharf, and he gets on a ferry. And, adding insult to injury, the band that accompanies them starts playing Carry Me Back to Old Virginia. Now, the crowd, to tell you about Boston, the crowd starts screaming, shame, shame, shame. I mean, the city here really let people know that they weren't going to tolerate slavery, that they weren't going to tolerate the fugitive slave law. Well, no, it became clear that if you were a slave catcher, Boston was not the safe place to be, and that this was a town that was not going to let you get away with these things.
They had something to prove, and they proved it. I'm Bernadette Williams, Supervisory Park Ranger, Boston African American National Historic Site.
And I'm Charles Taylor. I'm another park ranger here at Boston African American. Thanks.